Fuck that guy. So today is Christmas, a time of joy, happiness, and gratitude. So what better way to celebrate it than to complain? So recently I've been playing a lot of old Mario games, and while most of them still generally hold up to this day, I was shocked by the amount of glaring flaws in every single one of them. So today I will be discussing each game in the series and pointing out what I believe to be its biggest issue, starting of course with Mario 1, not that one. Super Mario Bros. Was revolutionary when it came out in 1985. It pioneered the side-scrolling platformer genre and was praised by critics. You might expect me to say that the bad controls or bad graphics are its biggest flaw, but I want to look at these games for what they were at the time of their release. And if you've ever played this game, back then or more recently, there's one feature that stands out as a major disappointment: the multiplayer. When you first see this option, it's easy to assume that you and another player can play through the game side by side, helping each other beat enemies and find secrets. Or maybe you can battle it out in a race mode. But the reality is that this mode essentially just swaps players when you die, something you can do in single player or in any other game by just passing your controller to the other player. Now I of course understand that this was implemented this way because of hardware limitations, but why even add it in the first place? All this mode ever did was disappoint millions of players around the world, so much so that it actually became a joke within the retro gaming community. Luckily, Nintendo decided to revisit this idea in future games. It's pretty common trivia that there are two Super Mario Bros. 2s, so I'll start with the original Japanese one, also known as the Lost Levels in America. This game reuses almost everything from the previous game, giving it all the same issues as that one, but I think there's something in Mario 2 that trumps all of those. This game is unfair as hell. This was somewhat intentional to give this game more difficulty than its predecessor, but they went way too far. For example, on the very first level of the game, you might expect to find a power mushroom at the start, but when you grab the mushroom that's there, you will instantly die, because that was actually a poison mushroom. How were you supposed to know that exactly? As you can tell, this is certainly not my favorite Mario game. All the small unfair elements, on top of retaining the bad controls from the first one, add up to this being a very troubled game. In my opinion, the American Mario 2, also known as Mario USA in Japan, is a much better game, but it's not really a better sequel. You may already know that this game wasn't originally a Mario game. The version we know is a reskin of the Japanese game Doki Doki Panic, which was developed by Nintendo in collaboration with Fuji Television. Doki Doki Panic, and thus Mario 2, feature many enemies that became staples of the series, such as Bob-ombs and Shy Guys. But at the time of this game's release, these felt completely disjointed from the previous game, and confused many American players who weren't aware of the game's history. This to me is this game's biggest problem. It didn't really feel like a proper successor to Mario 1 in the way that the Lost Levels did. But that doesn't mean this game didn't move the series forward. I just wish it had more elements from the first one. Super Mario Bros. 3 is considered one of the best 2D platformers of all time, so I originally thought it would be hard to find many issues, but when I thought about it, there's really only one option. There's no saving. This was obviously also an issue with the first three games, but those were a lot simpler and very few people expected them to include saving. But for Mario 3 it was a legitimate complaint, as shown by the Japanese manual for the game, which literally has a note apologizing to the players for not including a battery in the cartridge for saving. By the way, I got this screenshot and translation from a video by She Says that shows the region differences between this game in America and Japan, so I'll link to that in the description. To be fair, most other NES games didn't have saving. It just sucked that a game this massive and high quality lacked it. Now we are finally moving away from the NES and onto other consoles, starting with Mario Land on the Game Boy. This game holds the record as the first Mario platformer on a handheld, so even though it's certainly a very flawed game, most people are able to ignore that and enjoy it for what it is, a charming little game for playing on the go. But I'm not one of those people. Whenever I play this game, I have an okay time, but the minute I start having fun, the game's already over. It clocks in at around 1 hour for a skilled player, which in my opinion is way too short for me to bother playing this over its sequel. But I guess I can give Nintendo a pass just this time, because of how cool this game must have been when it released. Super Mario World is my personal favorite retro Mario game, so believe me when I say this one was hard. Just kidding, it's this part in the world map. Like, what the fuck do I do? Okay, but for real, this is another one of those best platformers of all time. And while it seems more people prefer Mario 3, it's a lot harder to find glaring issues here. But if I had to pick one, I guess it would be the lack of new power-ups. Now, I understand that adding a ton of new power-ups seems like a pretty big gimmick for a game, but when you think about it, most major Mario games have at least 3 new main power-ups, as well as some from the previous games. But Mario World only has 2, and one of them is barely used, though I do get why it's barely used. And it only brings back the main power-ups from the original game, none of the cool unique ones from Mario 3. This is of course still a great game, this flaw just always bugged me. And now we go back to the Game Boy with Super Mario Land 2. This is another one of my favorites, mainly because they were actually able to make it a more reasonable length this time. Now, it's still only 2 to 3 hours long, but considering it's still on the original Game Boy, that's damn impressive. Most people consider this to be one of the best Game Boy games, and while being on this console definitely makes this game notable, it did come with some caveats. Limitation may breed curiosity, but limitation can also, well, limit. This game has so many good ideas, and it's such a shame that they're all crammed into only 25 levels. For reference, Mario World had 96 levels. But it really shows how good this game is that my main complaint for it is that it didn't get a proper chance to shine. Mario 64 marks a big change in the Mario series, and in the video game industry as a whole. Now that 3D games were finally a possibility, most developers started viewing 2D games as somewhat inferior. And because 3D games generally take longer to make than 2D ones, all the games I talk about from now on will have released years apart rather than months. Now, about Mario 64. I don't really like this game. It has okay mechanics and level design, but the movement, and especially the camera controls, are utter garbage to me. I am of course looking at this game from a modern perspective, and many people actually like the movement in this game, as shown by the massive speedrunning scene. But there's no saving the camera controls. Even players at the time had issues with them, as shown by this passage from IGN's review of the game in 1996. The game is initially less accessible than the previous Mario titles. Although the 3-pronged analog controller isn't really where the difficulty lies, the joypad itself performs excellently. Overall, the biggest obstacle in the game is finding the correct viewpoint. In the end, Mario 64 still managed to be a revolutionary game when it released, and is still remembered fondly to this day. Nowadays, Mario Sunshine is looked at as a solid yet flawed Mario game, but at its release, this game was a lot more mixed in its reception. Similar to many other sequels on Gamecube, Mario Sunshine implements all of the best elements from the previous game while adding its own unique theming and gimmicks. In the case of this game, that theme is a tropical island, and that gimmick is flood. When Sunshine was released in 2002, many people wanted Gamecube games to just be better looking versions of N64 games, but in the case of this game, Mario Kart Double Dash, and especially Wind Waker, people were very disappointed by their unique approach. However, there's one criticism of this game that I actually agree with: the difficulty. Similar to the Lost levels, this game has a ton of unfair sections. They aren't quite as bad as they were in that game, but with how imprecise Sunshine's controls can be, these parts can still be really annoying. So when I talk about New Super Mario Bros., I'm sure many people will immediately jump to how aesthetically boring these games are. And while that may be true, and a spoiler for later in this video, I don't think it's fair to say that about the first game. When it came out, this game was loved by fans and critics alike, and it was deemed by many as a modern classic. And while its art style has been reused to death as of recent years, it was unique enough at the time that it was rarely critiqued. However, there's one feature of the game that I find very lackluster, and that just happens to be the main selling point of the game: the Mega Mushroom. This is a power-up that transforms Mario into Mega Mario, who can trample anything in his path. While this power-up seems really useful at first, its drawbacks quickly become apparent. The most obvious of which is, it only appears in 4 levels, and when you do get it, it basically just lets you skip over all the level design and challenge. This item appeared in multiple future games, such as Mario Kart Wii and Mario 3D World, and it has very similar problems in them as well, showing that this power-up definitely needed to be thought through a bit more. Okay, so at the start of this video, I kinda lied to you. I will not be ranking every Mario game today. I will only be doing the first half, which is what I have just done. So this will unfortunately be the end of this video, but I want to stress, this is an artistic decision and is definitely not because I needed to get this out by Christmas. I will hopefully release part 2 sometime in January or February, but either way, thank you so much for watching. This was the first of this kind of video that I've made, and I put a lot of work into it, so if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. And if you have your own ideas for videos, feel free to suggest them either in the comments or on my Discord server, link in the description. But anyways, that's it for today. I hope you have a fantastic Christmas, and I'll see you next time. Bye.